Next stop, forgotten. The driver's voice crackled over the speaker, dragging me violently from the abyss of sleep into the harsh glare of reality. I groaned, rubbing my eyes, feeling even more drained than when I had boarded the bus an hour ago. Next stop, forgotten. What the hell was he talking about? I couldn't afford to miss my stop. I reached into my overstuffed backpack and pulled out a crumpled map on which I had meticulously marked my journey west the night before. I had fled my house in Saskatoon, desperate to escape. Like most 16-year-olds, I despised my life. My family was a dysfunctional mess. A stepfather who treated me like a burden, a mother who just stood by and let it happen, and a bratty half-brother who could do no wrong. At school, I was either ignored or bullied because, apparently, being into books and fashion magazines was akin to being a leper. My job as a grocery store cashier was lousy, dealing with rude customers and an obnoxious boss. I decided to get away from it all. Now, as the bus rumbled along a dusty road flanked by endless wheat fields, I studied the map, but it wasn't much help. I had no idea where I was. I decided to get off at the next stop and figure things out from there. Speaking of which, next stop, forgotten. What did the driver mean? Had he forgotten the town's name, or was it actually called Forgotten? I glanced around, hoping one of my fellow passengers might shed some light on the situation, but none of them seemed promising. There was a shriveled old lady in a purple and yellow floral print dress, knitting a red scarf. A young man with long black hair and red-rimmed eyes, looking strung out. And a girl around my age, snoring loudly. That left the driver. I stood and walked down the aisle, holding onto the seats for balance. The driver, a tired-looking, droopy-faced guy with a thatch of wiry gray hair, stared straight ahead through the dusty windshield. "Shouldn't you be sitting?" he muttered. "Sir, what do you mean by next stop, Forgotten?" "The next stop is a town called Forgotten. Not that anybody ever gets off there, or on." "I'm getting off there." He glanced sideways at me, eyebrows raised, and snorted. "Teenagers," he muttered. My temper flared. "Excuse me, but I don't appreciate your..." "Sit down or I'll make you walk the rest of the way." I stomped back to my seat. What an asshole. No, I really wanted to get off this bus. To pass the time, I thought about my family back home. Surely they had noticed my absence by now. They would probably call the police to maintain the illusion that they were caring parents, but secretly, they would be rejoicing and relieved that it was me who had vanished. As for my brother, well, screw them all. Finally, the bus screeched to a stop, groaning like an old man. My fellow passengers didn't move. They seemed completely oblivious to what was happening around them. Hadn't the bus been packed when I first boarded? How long had I been asleep? It was clearly daytime, but I didn't have a watch, so I couldn't be sure. The driver just grunted at me as I walked by him. I stepped out into the blinding white sunshine, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. The bus rumbled away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in its wake, and I was alone. The bus stop was nothing more than a splintery wooden bench. Beyond it lay the town, if you could call it that. Forgotten consisted of a lonely stretch of road with buildings and houses scattered haphazardly on both sides. Nothing matched, it was just a mindless jumble. There were no cars in sight or people. "Shit," I muttered, shading my eyes with my hand. "Is this a ghost town?" Maybe I should have stayed on the bus. My instincts screamed at me to stay put, but my feet had a mind of their own, propelling me forward down the empty road. The storefronts and houses I passed were in a pitiful state, sagging porches, boarded up windows, peeling paint, overgrown lawns. The road was riddled with potholes, and in one yard sat a rusty Volkswagen Beetle, its original color obscured by layers of grime. I kept walking, too curious to turn back, consulting the map again. Forgotten wasn't on it. The sad little place lived up to its name. The silence was broken only by my footsteps and the sound of my own breathing. So when I heard someone moving behind me, following me, the soft footfall sounded louder than an atomic bomb. I froze, My blood roared in my ears, and chills shuddered through my body. Sweat trickled down my neck. No, I thought, this can't be happening. This was a horror movie scenario, and I didn't want to be that stupid girl who makes all the wrong choices. But I didn't know if I should look back or just keep walking. It seemed both might get me killed. Hey. The voice made me jump several feet into the air and stumble backward. I landed flat on my ass, my hands scraping painfully along the road as they broke my fall. A girl stood over me, pale, skinny, with hair the color of corn silk and light blue eyes bulging against her hollow cheeks. She wore a yellow t-shirt and faded blue overalls, grungy white sneakers on her feet. "You don't belong here," she said. It wasn't an accusation or a reprimand, just a statement. "Yeah, I figured that out pretty quickly," I said, holding up my raw, bleeding hands. "Who are you?" "Clara," she replied. "I'm Holly. I didn't think anyone lived here." "Not many," she said. "Just a few stragglers." "I take it you're just passing through?" "Yes." Clara walked over, took my arm, and pulled me to my feet. "Where are you headed?" "British Columbia," I told her. "I want to see the mountains and the forest." Clara blinked her gigantic eyes at me. "Mountains," she said, as if the word didn't quite fit in her mouth. "Come with me. We need to clean up your hands." She turned and headed toward a ramshackle house. With no other choice, I followed. The house might have been pretty once, but now it was just a dump, with the porch rotting away and the picket fence leaning to one side like crooked teeth. The roof looked like it was caving in, and the front lawn was a jungle. How could anybody live here? Clara opened the door, the rusty hinges squealing like a pig being slaughtered. Dust billowed out, making me cough. I entered the foyer, which was dark, dank, and smelled of neglect. "Come on," Clara whispered. She spoke so quietly, as if she didn't want to be heard. I wondered if she was alone in this house, but decided not to ask yet. She took me to the bathroom, which had black mold growing in the tub and deep cracks in the tiled walls. A steady drip of some murky greenish liquid fell from the rusty tap and landed in the chipped porcelain sink. Mercifully, the toilet seat was down, but the smell was enough to make me gag. I sat down on the toilet, watching Clara rifle through the medicine cabinet. She took out a roll of gauze and a tube of antiseptic cream, then muttered, "I'll be back," and left me alone. This was too weird. I began to wonder if this was all just a dream, that I was still on the bus, putting more and more miles between myself and home. Now I was stuck in this lonely, decaying town, and although I knew I could just stand up and walk out at any time, something told me it wasn't going to be that simple. I wasn't ready to leave when Clara returned, carrying a bucket of water that looked clean enough. I submerged my hands, and she began to disinfect and bandage them. "There," she said, offering a tiny smile. "Now you just have to let them heal." "Thank you," I replied, smiling back despite barely knowing her. I felt a surprising sense of rapport with Clara. She had gone out of her way to help me. A total stranger, without any obligation. She hadn't judged or asked questions, she just took my hand. That was more than I could say for anyone I knew back in Saskatoon. "I guess I better get going," I said. "Do you know when the next bus is coming?" "Once a day," Clara told me. "But you can't go back out there. It isn't safe." "What are you talking about?" "Let's hope you never find out," she muttered as we exited the bathroom. A thin, reedy voice floated down the hall. "Clara, is that you?" An older woman sat in a wheelchair, her face half hidden beneath a heavy curtain of gray-brown bangs. Like Clara, she was skinny as a plucked chicken, dressed in a shapeless dress that emphasized her bony frame. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts. She was blind. "Yes, Aunt Wendy, it's me. We have a visitor." Wendy rolled towards us, the wheels of her chair creaking. I stepped forward, extending my hand. Hi, I'm Holly." She took my hand, staring up at me with sightless eyes. "It's nice to meet you, but you shouldn't be here." "I know she can't leave yet," Clara said. "Not until the bus comes back." "No, she can't," Wendy agreed. "Tell me, Holly, what brought you here?" "I was on a bus," I explained. "I missed my stop, so I got off here." "I see. You should have just kept going." "I know," I admitted. "Aunt Wendy, I'm going to show Holly to her room," said Clara. She led me upstairs to a dusty room, empty save for a narrow cot. The raggedy white sheets smelled mildewy, and I had no intention of sleeping in them. The window, of course, was boarded over, but thin fingers of sunlight squeezed through the gaps. I thought of the town outside, so empty and eerie. Unexplained tears welled in my eyes. I turned around, wanting to thank Clara for everything, but she had disappeared. So I sat down on the cot and waited. What the hell am I doing here? That question played on an endless loop in my head, even as the sun went down and shadows crept in, encompassing forgotten in their darkness. Once again, I was awoken by a female voice, soft but frantic. "Holly." I cracked one eye open, my head still fuzzy from the dream I'd been having. Something about my parents burning everything I'd ever left behind in a raging bonfire. Clara leaned over me, shaking me awake. "What is it?" I mumbled. "You have to stay awake, Holly. You can't let your guard down." "Huh." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. I could hear noise from outside. It sounded like chanting, deep voices speaking a language completely unrecognizable to me. "What is that?" I demanded. Clara just shook her head, trembling, her eyes filled with tears. From somewhere down the hall, a woman sobbed. "Wendy?" I began, but Clara put a finger to my lips. The chanting was growing louder and closer. "Now you know why you can't leave," Clara whispered. "The dying, they will get you. I don't understand." "We have to wait, Holly." Clara's eyes gleamed with tears as she spoke. My gaze drifted upwards to the boards nailed across the window, and for the first time, I noticed a small hole where a knot had fallen out. "Holly, no," Clara hissed. At first, I saw nothing, just an endless mass of black stretching on forever. "Holly, stop. You don't want to see this." The blackness before me suddenly shifted like a curtain being pulled back, and finally, I saw them, shadows. Dozens of humanoid shadows marching down the road. Featureless except for their crimson eyes, eyes that glowed like lanterns. The bizarre chanting poured from unseen mouths, filling the cool night air and rising up into the cloudy sky above. They were following a leader. "Clara," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are they?" "The dying," she replied, her voice barely audible. "They come for those who are lost, those who have no place." I tore my eyes away from the horrifying spectacle, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do we do?" "We wait," Clara said, her voice a mixture of fear and resignation. "And we hope they pass us by." A tall shadow, nearly 7 feet tall with long gangly limbs, loomed over the others. It carried something over its shoulder, a woman in a white nightdress, emaciated and fragile. My hand flew to my mouth as I watched, unable to tear my eyes away. The shadows abruptly stopped, and their leader dropped the woman. She flopped onto the dirty road like a rag doll, the impact jarring her awake. She began to scream, "No, sweet Jesus, no. Please don't do this." "Another sacrifice," Clara murmured from behind me. "They make one once a year. Soon there will be no one left and forgotten." I wanted desperately to look away, but the poor woman's terrible screams tore at my ears. As the shadows closed in on her, her terrified wails turned into heavy sobs. Clara yanked me back, and we huddled together on the bed, listening to the woman's agonizing cries. Whatever the shadows were doing to her, it sounded like she was being tortured in the most excruciating ways imaginable, like being dunked in boiling water, having her skull slowly crushed in a vice, or being skinned alive while someone poured lemon juice into the open wounds. By the time the horrible sounds finally ceased, my face was wet with tears. "It's over," Clara muttered. "Let's go check on Wendy." My new friend held my bandaged hand as we walked down the hall and entered Wendy's room. She lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling, her body shaking, tears flooding the lines of her skin. She was mumbling what sounded like a prayer. The chanting had started up again but was now distant, slowly fading away. Despite the boarded-up windows, I felt the shadows could see us, their red eyes burning into our flesh. "They're gone," Clara whispered, more to herself than to me, "but they'll be back." I looked over at Wendy, who appeared to have slipped back into sleep. "Jesus," I muttered. "No," Clara shook her head, smiling sadly. "He can't save this town. Nobody can." Too numb to feel afraid anymore, I walked past her and returned to my own room. Peering through the peephole once more, I saw the shadows were gone. All that remained of the woman were a few scraps of white fabric and a pool of blood glinting in the moonlight. The last thing I saw before turning away were Clara's blue eyes, practically glowing in the dark. "Next stop, Saskatoon." The driver's voice, muffled and crackling over the speaker, yanked me violently from the abyss of sleep and into the harsh light of reality. I opened my eyes. I was back on the bus. The lady in the floral print dress was still knitting. The stoned guy still sat there staring at nothing. And the teenage girl was still fast asleep, snoring loudly. My backpack lay at my feet, the rolled-up map sticking out. Next stop, Saskatoon. I was heading home. Thank God. But how had I gotten here? Clara, Wendy, the town of Forgotten. It had all been a dream. Next stop, Saskatoon. I smiled to myself. Soon I would be home. Soon everything would be back to normal. I'd be back with my dysfunctional little family, back at a school that didn't accept me. But it would be familiar, safe, just a dream, I thought, smiling to myself. Just a crazy dream. Then I looked down. My hands were wrapped in gauze, spotted here and there with dried maroon blood. I had fallen and scraped them, I remembered now. Clara had patched me up. Holy shit, had it been real? "Is something the matter, dear?" asked the old woman. "I'm okay," I lied, shoving my hands inside my pockets to hide them. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I am. Have you heard of a town called Forgotten?" "I have indeed. It's been abandoned for decades now, although I'm not sure why." She lowered her voice and added, "It was rumored to be cursed. Something about shadows wandering the streets at night and making human sacrifices. Sounds ridiculous, right?" "Yes." I felt the healing wounds on my hands open up again, fresh blood seeping into the bandages. "It does. Next stop, Saskatoon." I leaned back in my seat, my head resting against the dusty window. The bus rolled along, putting more and more miles between me and Forgotten, leaving the nightmare behind, leaving Clara and Wendy behind. As the bus wheezed to a stop, I made a promise to myself. I won't ever forget.